hear us,
Thank you, Kate.
that'd be great. Thank you, Kate, for
If Kate
saving
wasn't
us.
here,
What would
we'd
we
have no
even,
bond.
what would we even do without Kate?
If
We'd
3
have no
TGH
bond.
members speak into the void and Kate's not there to tell them that they can't be heard, do they still make a sound?
All right, Kate, since you can hear us, we're good to go.
There we go.
Hey.
We did it. All right.
Packing
So
10 is
packing 10.
good.
Yeah, I think we're all in agreement here. This is probably a good move. It doesn't make a lot of difference right now because he's been there a while, but he was at least in part responsible for them kind of turning things around as the season went along. So I think overall, pretty universally, a good move. Interesting that they're sticking with the Korean head coach, even though they're now pretty much entirely a Western roster. Kariv being their only Korean player at this point. So kind of an interesting thing there. You don't necessarily see that a lot, but I'm excited to see what he'll be able to do with a full season, a full off season, and maybe some roster changes going into next year. But second coaching announcement that we got, and this is kind of 2-in-1. This came from the AMA that Huck did earlier this week. The Boston GM announced that Mineral has been signed as their head coach for the 2020 season. And at the same time, we also kind of got the news that Gunba is going to be leaving the team, looking for other opportunities. He was kind of sharing the head coaching duties the entire year, which is a really strange situation to me. So, say what you will about Mineral, he hasn't had the best track record in Overwatch for the most part, but having a head coach installed is a step in the right direction, I guess, for Boston.
He keeps getting work, so
there's got to be something there.
Yeah, there's someone's drawing people in.
Yeah, I don't really have too many opinions on the matter myself. It kind of what I was saying with the reverse of Packing 10, where Packing 10 kind of helped the Valiant get to a good stage, so anything better than 0-7. I mean, Boston can't really do much worse than what they had recently, so maybe any change is a good change, although who knows with Boston.
I do agree that or a little bit more organization could probably help them out. Like having somebody like officially taking on the head coach role is probably a good step. They apparently did not have that before, which is not something I realized.
Yeah,
I had no clue until Gunba's Twitlonger came out the other day, and I mean that's just a yikes for me. Like how do you have a structure like that as an Overwatch League team? It doesn't make any sense, and kind of reinforces my opinion that Huck is maybe a little bit incompetent. I mean, obviously, I don't have all the info, but I'm starting to think that season 1 was a little bit of a fluke for them, and this is the real Boston, what we've seen this year.
That a lot of it had to do with the players, because I mean, stage 3, you saw that like at the end, what was it? Striker was crying because of how difficult it was, despite all the internal issues, which we were finding out later were still present a lot in stage 3. Yeah. It was really the players kind of persevering against that.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, a lot of it might have also been Krusty, who is, went from Boston and now with arguably the best team in the league in San Francisco. So that's another thing to keep in mind there. But good luck to Mineral to try to help turn that team around and make something happen next year. I wish him luck, but we'll just have to wait and see pretty much at this point. He's got a lot of time to do it, so that's at least good that I guess they got this before the off season. But let's move on to something that might matter a little bit now that we are talking playoffs here, and that is the Hangzhou Spark picking up U4, formerly the coach of the Shanghai Dragons. Now coming on to Hangzhou as an assistant coach, at least for their playoff run here towards the end of the season. Darby, this is your team, so how does this signing make you feel?
Better today than it did yesterday. It's a good thing we did not do the show last night when I was panicking slightly over this decision, because the initial thought is, oh, the coach of season 1's Shanghai Dragons. Interesting. Since then, it's occurred to me that they've said U4 has been working with them since stage 2. When Yindong left, they picked up U4. In that case, I feel a little bit better since, stage 3 is sort of the best stage they had. I think having another Chinese coach to replace Yindong is a good idea if you're going to keep Chinese players on the team, which I'm not sure they actually are, but that's just sort of throwing a theory into the wind. I'm cautiously optimistic. I don't think it's going to matter for playoffs any more than it's mattered already if U4 has been here for half the season now. I think whatever we're getting from Hangzhou now is what we were going to get regardless.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting to see him get another shot here
Yeah.
in the Overwatch League, and hopefully he makes the most of it. Last year was a bit of a disaster on all fronts for Shanghai, so it's kind of hard to pin it on any one person. I mean, it's kind of hard to pin it on players, on the coaches, on any one aspect of it. So I guess he deserves a second chance here, and hopefully he'll be a good fit with Hangzhou. Okay, so that wraps up the coaching side of things. The last little thing that we've got here before we get into the meat and potatoes is the announcement coming down that we are getting rookie and MVP awards tonight at the Blizzard Arena for the first round of playoffs. Both of those awards are getting announced. We know the voting for MVP has been going on for quite a while, and I'm pretty sure we've talked about it on here multiple times. So let's look a little bit, I guess, at the rookie of the year side of things. I bet who do you guys think? Not necessarily who has to win, but who are just names that kind of immediately jump out to you on this side of things.
I know that my biased personal opinion would be Nero, just because he really brought the charge back from a very tough couple of stages to making the ninth seed in playoffs, and kind of really being. They've got a lot of good players, but he really was the carry that kind of helped everyone else kind of get on track with their momentum. So from individual playmaking standards, I think he could be considered one of the rookies of the year just by how much he changed everything about that team. I definitely think that I didn't write down a list of which others, but I know that there's several other players who'd be really good for that as well. Specifically, any Vancouver Titan, probably, except for Hureg, not Hureg.
Yeah.
Or
True.
Teasy.
Tizzy.
Teasy can't do
Yeah,
it.
Who
Teasy
did not play. Who is now with the team, but yeah. Any other Titans are eligible. This is kind of a weird. It's a weird year for Rookie of the Year, just because we had 8 expansion teams this year, which means you've got 8 teams, 8+ teams like worth of rookies coming into the league this year. So about half of the league was rookies, I think. So it's kind of strange. Especially when a lot of the players who are eligible or candidates for this are also kind of MVP candidates. It'll be a more interesting award going forward this year. A little strange though.
We talked about it on House Queens last night. You should watch the VOD chat. Even though I think chat's mostly just Kate, who was on the show. And a lot of what we talked about was, well, I'll try to sum it up because we got stuff to talk about. We talked a lot about players who had kind of taken on leadership roles and sort of served as sort of the beacon, especially in teams that were underperforming. So names that we brought up, Fusions over on Boston. I brought up Corey and Stratus again because that's all I ever talk about. If we're going to go strictly for less for more symbolic thing and more for skill, I'll throw my hat in the ring for IDK, who went from Lucky Future to now starting on Team South Korea, which I think is massive, especially considering the hero pool for team, or not the hero pool, the player pool for Team South Korea. We talked about Cruz, but I don't think Cruz actually counts in that same. I mostly talked about Cruz in the category with Fusions and Corey and all of them. I don't really think he's a contender.
I think Corey could be a really good pick. He really didn't. Corey the carry, he was doing really well in Washington.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's like there's a lot of good candidates. I don't know how I feel about someone like Corey winning it when he was basically. I want to put this nicely, but never mind. He was only relevant for one stage. he was.
To be fair,
he
a
was,
lot of people were only relevant.
Oh,
for
I
once.
mean, no, that's not unique to him by any means whatsoever. This year was very strange in the way things played out with our metas, the role lock, 3/4 of the way through the season. A lot of things are just kind of very strange coming away from that. But for me, I mean, I'm kind of giving this, or in my mind, I'm giving this award to a player who I think got snubbed for being a potential MVP candidate, and that's Hoxall. And this is what I was talking about, where the Rookie of the Year vote is kind of broken this year because calling Hoxall a rookie just feels wrong. The dude has been playing Overwatch as long as anybody at a high level, so he just hasn't been in the Overwatch League until this year. So calling him a rookie is weird, but if we are strictly going by what the Overwatch League's definition of the award is, I think he's kind of the clearest choice. But it'll be interesting. We get both those awards tonight, and I'm excited to see it. MVP, especially. I want to know if Twitch chat and the voting there is actually just going to be how it turns out. If Sinatra is going to run away with it, I really want to see like the full voting list once things kind of shake out. But I think that's a pretty good pick. But enough talking about news, announcements, whatnot. Let's get into the why we are really here, and that is of course the games. We'll get to predictions and looking forward to this week in just a little bit, but let's start pretty quickly by talking a little bit about what we saw last week with the play-in tournament. So let's just start kind of big picture, and I want to know what was kind of the biggest takeaway for each of you coming out of last week.
Plot armor remains strong. I don't understand how we can still I think it's my fault. I think it's every single time I start counting out Soul decides, nah, we're gonna play Overwatch after all. I won't really step on Ethan's toes because I know Ethan wants to talk about it, but it's a little bit disappointing to have all this hype for the top 2 seeded teams in the play-in tournament to end up making it anyway. But yeah, that's about it. London put on their playoff face as they tend to do, and Seoul proved me wrong as they tend to do when it matters. So that's it. Not as fun as I thought it was going to be. Unlucky.
Yeah, we'll transition into you, Ethan, since Darby kind of touched on your point here.
Yeah, just the hype for play-ins, especially, and not step on Bradley's toes, especially with 3 of the teams being Chinese teams. There was all this hype about the play-in tournaments being even better than the actual playoffs themselves, and we got Seoul and London, the top 2 teams, who kind of saw the strategies from the first game, really kind of learned from them, and just they didn't crush, because that Shanghai-London game, regardless of what happened, was probably one of the most intense games I've ever watched to date. And it's amazing, and you should watch it if you haven't already. But yeah, just the fact that Seoul and London really came in and won that when we had this battle for the bottom teams kind of going on, and this whole narrative about anyone can make it if you're in the top 12. Should have just had Seoul and London get it in the first place and not get our hopes up. I also wanted to point out Blizzard, or maybe not Blizzard, but the Overwatch League with the whole Philadelphia situation with the double Kings Row. That was a boo-boo. Kate's touched on it very well, both on Twitter and on House Queens last night, that it really sucked that she was forced to root against Philly in order to make it a fair fight. Yeah, what's up?
I mean, no, I was in voice chat watching that game with Kate win that, and we were just losing our freaking minds when we went on to Kings Row for a second time. I felt really bad for her. I mean, like you said there, I mean, it was, I think it was pretty clearly a mistake, and one that luckily didn't come back to matter, but could have been a really awkward situation if Philly had won that series.
And this is the same kind of issue that what happened with the Guangzhou Dallas game, where there was a glitch. I get that, but you had to restart the map, and Dallas were literally about to get full held, and they restarted, and Dallas pushed the entire way through. Guangzhou won in the end, so it was another situation where it was kind of okay regardless. But if you don't have those situations happening, it really creates an unfairness and this sense of the league being able to kind of do whatever they want in these situations, make these kind of snap decisions just to keep everything running where it's not really that fair. And I just hope that this does not become a more regular thing. If there's, hopefully they learned from the backlash on Twitter that that was not a good decision.
My takeaway from this week was that unfortunately all of the really fun teams are gone, and you talked about it a little bit, Ethan, but in part this is a kind of code for the 3 Chinese teams that were in the play-ins, and I talked about this in the article I wrote, that came out today, where it's just, I don't know, it doesn't feel good to see that the 3 teams who the entire season have kind of been doing their own thing, playing off meta, going outside the box, all went home this week, and that was just sad. Like these were, I think, the most entertaining teams across the board from the entire season, who really found their own style, and at least in the case of Shanghai, rode that all the way to a stage finals victory, and we're really proving that you don't necessarily have to play the meta. Now the meta is way different than it ever was back then, but I still am gonna miss them. I wish at least one of those teams would have been able to make it through, because now the kind of the gauntlet for Chinese Overwatch has, it falls to the Hangzhou Spark now, who
falls to Gushui in particular.
Yes, that's true. He's the only
remaining Chinese player.
Yeah. And as much as I enjoy Hangzhou and their year has been fantastic, they play the meta. They're a pretty cookie cutter team. They don't go crazy with their hero picks and things like that. They tend to kind of stick with what everybody else is doing and trying to perfect it, and that is perfectly reasonable. It has gotten them to they'd end up the 4 seed in the playoffs. So
Yeah.
I mean, it was a successful approach and one that works. But I am gonna miss all of the really really fun Chinese teams that we had. And it was sad to see them go home. But let's move on to a little bit of oh, actually, sorry. We're how much time do we have? We are running short, so I'm gonna actually no. This is important enough to talk about. Sorry.
It's about toes. You'll see.
Yes, it's about toes. We're gonna talk about the meta a little bit. We got Sigma in the lineup for the first time this week, and I just want to know kind of initial impressions from you guys. What it was for me. The thing that I am taking away from this is just how fun the meta was. I was really worried going into playoffs that we were just gonna have this like really boring shield poke, double shield meta that limited the way teams were gonna be able to play. But the reality was it turned out to be a whole lot of fun. The Doomfist, the Pharah, all of it was just fantastic to watch.
I agree, and I really enjoyed seeing him, for lack of a better word, played kind of as a hybrid. Like, he was very much not just the new tank hero, I thought. It was really interesting to see, like, how he was being used, just sort of as a main tank, as an off tank, depending on who you're watching, as a DPS. I was really enjoying seeing kind of people breaking him out in any way they could think of, which I think is the perfect time to do it before things get a little bit more rigid, as they tend to do once you get used to a character's tricks. So I was really enjoying seeing the variety there.
Yeah, my point was pretty similar to Darby's. The fact that the 4 teams that didn't make it were almost all exclusively playing him as an off tank, but the 2 teams that did make it were the ones playing him as the main tank, while having the off tank, Michelle or Fury, switch to an Orisa, which is really, that's a very uncommon thing to see an Orisa played as an off tank, or at least by an off tank player. Curious to see what happens in the coming weeks. Are all of the other teams going to kind of figure out that that's the meta, have the off tank player really switch to this Orisa and main tank on Sigma, or was that just London and Seoul kind of figuring out something that worked for them in that situation, but the meta will kind of go back to normal? So I'm really curious to see kind of what happens in the next weeks with Sigma and Orisa play.
I mean, for me, I see it kind of less as like playing Sigma as an off tank or as a main tank, depending on which player you have on that role. For me, it's just like teams figuring out which of their players is going to work best on Sigma in particular, and going with that, because I think Orisa is a little bit easier, I would say, to kind of pick up and to play effectively. Yes, you still have to be coordinated with your team, and there are lots of nuances to every hero in this game, but I think Orisa has been around longer, so everyone is kind of familiar with how she plays in general. So I think it's easier for people to pick her up than Sigma, and I think it might kind of lend itself, or Sigma might kind of lend himself to main tank players a little bit, just because the shield mechanics are something that off tanks don't usually have to worry about. It's not something that is kind of embedded in their mind, whereas a main tank is always worried about their shield management and the cooldowns that come from that. So I think Sigma just maybe works a little bit better for that reason, but I do think it's going to be fascinating to see how the remaining 6 teams choose to play him, given what we saw this weekend. But all in all, I think it turned out to be a fantastic addition, and to me, actually kind of saved the playoffs a little bit, because I'm not gonna lie, I would not have really enjoyed a playoff meta of the May Reaper shenanigans we were getting in Stage 4. I'm enjoying this a lot more, so I'm actually very happy with how things are playing out right now. Okay, now we can do look forward to this week, and we'll start with the WatchHaus player to watch, brought to you by not Toes again.
What?
No, not Toes again.
Brought to you by Kings Row. The map's so nice we play it twice.
No.
Or Toes again.
Thank you.
That's for Darby and Kate.
Don't ignore my toes.
Okay.
Anyway.
So, Ethan, why don't you kick us off here? Who do you have your eye on as we head into the first week of playoff bracket?
All right. I apparently yoinked Darby's pick, so I need to make sure to do it justice. I'm going to say Rascal, because out of all of the San Francisco Shock players, he's really been the one that's kind of picked up. Well, he's had a tradition of picking up new heroes before a lot of other players. He did that with Sombra back before the league even started, and he did it with Baptiste basically this year. In the way that no other team really played Baptiste until Stage 4, when Rascal had really already gotten him down. We even saw Rascal flex to the support role in the 2-2-2 lock just to play Baptiste again. If anyone can kind of pick up a new hero, I think it would be Rascal, or at least know how to work with that new hero. The Shock have enough DPS that they could probably run 2 really good DPS like Architect, Striker, Sinatra, and have Rascal on the off tank if they really needed to. So I think we're going to see Rascal in some facet, whether it be support, DPS, or tank line. So I think he's really the player to watch who will make or break Shanghai. And I think it'll be more make than break in the situation, considering how good they are.
For sure. Darby, did he do it justice?
He said Shanghai, but I'll ignore that.
Oh, did I say Shanghai? I meant San Francisco. I've got the Chinese teams on the brain, and I'm just...
For my player to watch, brought to you by Toes again. I'm going back to my Overwatch League roots. The first player I truly loved from the first team I truly loved. I'm watching Surefour because he kind of popped off recently, and it's nice to see him do that again after kind of, for lack of a better word, sleepy performance before then. I guess getting called out by the desk as passive or whatever unlocked his gamer skills or whatever, but it's been really fun to watch him again. And I think if there's any time where he could pop off and perhaps, as Ethan likes to say, redo the whole bamboozle thing, now would be the time.
The bamboozle.
The Gladiators are in fact probably going to, one way or the other, play 2 games this week. I think they have to, because they'll either move on or they'll go down to the losing bracket, which is where they'll go. Kate, smile. I think, but yeah, I'll keep an eye on Surefour for that, because I think now is the time he's really kind of gonna wrap it up. And if there's any time for him to sort of drag out some surprises for the Gladiators, now would be the time.
Yeah, I mean, we saw kind of briefly last week in that Seoul Guangzhou game how impactful a good McCree can really be in this meta, and Surefour historically has been somewhat known for his hit scan play and his McCree. I believe Decay as well. So the Gladiators have a lot of good options on that front. I do think Surefour will be a big part of that. For me, I'm looking at the star DPS for the Atlanta Reign, and that has to be Erster. Coming into this week, they've got a really tall task ahead of them going up against the San Francisco Shock. And I think if they're going to have any chance in that game, they are going to need a carry performance for the ages out of Erster. I am very excited to see his Doomfist. I've heard very good things, and I've seen some of it in the past, but it's been a little while. And I think he'll be the one picking up Doomfist for the Reign. So I am definitely looking to him to really be the superstar that they need to go far in the playoffs. And I think they are a team I have my eye on to make some kind of a lower bracket run. But I do think they're going to have their hands full this week with the Shock, as you talked about, Ethan. That team is absolutely loaded up and down the roster with talent. So they're going to be tough to beat here this week. But we'll get into predictions and whatnot in just a minute, and we'll actually. Not just a minute. We'll do it right now. And we're going to start with the first game of the evening, in kicking off in just under an hour. The Vancouver Titans, the number one record in the league, the best team kind of over the balance of the regular season, taking on the Seoul Dynasty, fresh off of that some would say upset win over the Guangzhou Charge. In really kind of dominant fashion. I think put together probably the best overall performance last week in terms of just having a good grasp on the meta and playing it. But they're going to be kicking things off for us tonight to get the playoffs underway, and I think this is going to be a really fun match to watch.
Mm-hmm.
I want to say coming in that. It's not to dismiss Seoul, but I think that Guangzhou partially just played really poorly, and that Seoul has always kind of had Guangzhou's number. I talked about it last week, that Seoul defeated them dominantly the first time and then barely lost the last time. So I almost think that doesn't... I feel like it's going to be start to overrate Seoul again time for anyone who kind of thinks that Seoul is going to win this. I think that the Vancouver Titans really have this. Also, before I go any further, Kate, I know you're in chat. Fill out your power rankings, please. You need to set it for the week before we start. But yeah, I think that Seoul had a dominant performance in a lot of the ways because Guangzhou didn't adapt well enough. So I think that it's not time to start overrating Seoul yet. It's a Vancouver, very, very likely, especially because they've had time to really prepare for this since they've had the number one seed for a while. I think that Vancouver has this.
Okay, you're easing my mind a little bit here, Ethan, because I was, and I guess still am, quite nervous for this game. I was really impressed with Seoul last week, and yeah, it was one game. Yeah, they came in and they got an insane performance out of Fleta on McCree that I don't know how replicable that will really be. But I'm still very scared of them. They have a lot of talent. Their DPS are going absolutely bonkers right now between Fitz and Fleta. That is one of the scariest duos I think that we've got in the league right now. When you're talking Doomfist and then McCree, Pharah, Reaper for Fleta, like all those heroes, I think they're fantastic on. And yeah, I think they had a very strong grasp on the meta, and I'm not sure about Vancouver right now. We haven't seen them really play meaningful Overwatch in a long time. They've had the number one seed more or less locked up for quite a while, so I don't know. I'm a little bit scared of them coming out rusty, but they do have the advantage of having tape on Seoul, so I think that'll be enough for them to take the win here. but I'm gonna be nervous the entire time.
That was a long, like, I feel like you took the long way around to, like, predict Vancouver in the end.
I did. I was never not going to pick Vancouver. They have earned the benefit of the doubt over the course of the season. I can't go against them now, but that doesn't mean I can't be terrified.
Yeah, that's valid. I mean, you guys kind of said what I was gonna say anyway. I say this with lots of love for Guangzhou as I wear their shirt and live in fear because their competitive manager follows me on Twitter and yells at me for rooting for other teams. Hi, Brenda. Guangzhou likes to take chances that I think Vancouver doesn't really. So on the one hand, it means they can surprise it. It can surprise other teams, but on the flip side, it means they can kind of get caught off guard. I don't think Vancouver can get holes poked in them the way Guangzhou can. So I just don't think. I think if Seoul goes in to that Titans game with the exact same attitude, I don't think it'll really matter because I don't think whatever tricks they had against Guangzhou would work against Vancouver. Honestly, I just think it's two wildly different play styles, and I think at this point, Vancouver's got it locked down to the point where I'm not comfortable rooting against them yet.
No, I don't think I am either. But we've talked enough about this game. Let's move on to the second game of the night, the one that might be, I guess, a little bit more interesting if we're all convinced that Vancouver's going to come away with that first matchup. We've got the Hangzhou Spark and the LA Gladiators, and on paper, this should be, I guess, kind of the closest playoff matchup that we've got. We got the 4 and 5 seeds going head to head here, and neither team I am, really confident in going into playoffs. But Darby, since this is at least one of your teams, I'm gonna clear the lane and let you go first.
My singular disagreement. Well, not quite, but we'll get to that. I just talked about how I think if there's any time Surefour can break out some surprises, this will be the time. I don't actually think he's going to do that. I don't think Gladiators have been the same kind of streaky, surprising team that they used to be in quite some time. But really, my argument here comes down to these two teams just played. Hangzhou just won, and I don't want to give up on Chinese teams being in playoffs. So I'm going with Hangzhou. And that's about it. I'm sure you guys have better arguments.
My only real argument is, comes down to the fact that Hangzhou has been really slow to start in every single meta that we've had so far. They never come out of the gates kind of firing on all cylinders. They eventually get to a point where they are an elite team, but it doesn't usually happen in week 1. Whereas the Gladiators are the team that kind of figures stuff out a little bit ahead of the curve. I think sometimes they pull out weird tricks. They have niche individual strategies for certain maps, and I think that's going to be enough to kind of push them over the line to catch Hangzhou off guard a little bit. But this is, in my mind, kind of a complete toss-up, really.
My argument is this hat. Now, I really hope Brenda isn't watching. Exactly.
You hope
and
Brenda
I love this hat.
You hope Brenda is not one of the 4 people watching right now.
Yes. But I have my argument is that I have purple gear and no pink gear. So in reality, Bradley, that was basically my exact argument. Hangzhou has always taken. I'm not gonna wear this anymore. That was just for the gag, which wasn't that funny. Hangzhou has always kind of been a little slow to start, which is why you'll see that I don't necessarily think they're going to get out this week, but I do think that the Gladiators have just enough spunk, and the fact that the meta is new and that there's a new hero entirely. I'm not sure, because we've seen London and Seoul playing Sigma on a main tank role. I don't think we can see Gushui max that or match that kind of flexibility, so it would probably have to still be an off tank, unless Gushui is just really good at Winston and Sigma and no other main tanks that well, and that one of the other 2 tanks can kind of flex to it. I think that Hangzhou probably won't win the first game that they play, it could easily be a toss-up, and I had Hangzhou until about yesterday, maybe. But the Surefour argument is another really good one as to why Gladiators could certainly pull this off, even though Hangzhou did just beat them. It was a different meta back then. Times have changed.
Different meta 2 weeks ago.
Yes.
Exactly. So
I will say about Hangzhou that I have no idea who would actually play Sigma, to the point where I'm not even sure they will play Sigma.
I kind of have the same thoughts about Vancouver and even LA a little bit here. I mean, I think Void will probably be the one to pick up the Sigma and do just fine with it, but a lot of teams I'm not 100% sure exactly how they're gonna approach this. So this is gonna be a learning week both for us as fans and people watching the games, and also for these teams themselves. Like we've got elimination games going on this week. The lower bracket, the first round of the lower bracket is happening, and we'll get to that in just a little bit. But teams are going to have to be like adapting on the fly and figuring stuff out about how to play in the new meta as we go along. So it's going to be fascinating. That kind of adaptation is going to be key. And whoever is quickest to do that is going to have quite a leg up here, moving forward through the playoffs. Let's move on to Friday's games now. And first up, we got the London Spitfire and the NYXL. So I think this one's kind of straightforward. London looked fairly strong last week. It's hard to get an accurate read off of kind of one game. But New York has been out of sorts for a while, and I don't know that they have, as weird as it is to say about a team that has 5 DPS players on the roster, I don't know that they have the DPS pool to like really excel in this meta. I don't know who plays Doomfist on this team. I have
Libero.
No clue. I guess it's Libero because he plays everything. But
Libero plays every flex hero basically, including Pharah and Doomfist. So
yeah. So what happens if they need to play Pharah and Doomfist? Who picks up the other one? That's what I'm a little concerned about. All in all, and they've just been in a weird funk recently, and I don't necessarily think that stops here.
It's playoffs London and it's playoffs New York, and that's pretty much the extent of my argument. I mean, Bradley pretty much just said what I was going to say. Like, London... Yeah. I don't know. Bradley just said exactly what I was going to say. These two teams and it's playoffs, and I just don't... I've been desperately trying to convince people that New York's still good, but I'm not even sure I have that argument in me anymore. I'm sure they're still good, but they're not... I don't really even consider them a contender for... Yeah. I don't consider them a contender for anything at this point.
It feels really weird to kind of write off the number 2 seed and say, oh, they don't have a chance. But that kind of seems to be where we are.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, really just, I mean, Darby summarized it probably better than I ever could with playoffs London versus playoffs New York. I certainly believe London will win. I can make a couple quick cases for New York in the sense that their last couple games were actually looking fairly competent against the actually, I think it was just their game against the Vancouver Titans went to a 5th map, but they also went to a 5th map against Dallas in stage 4. So, what can we really say about the New York XL? Libero, I think if they could clone Libero, they could win anything, but they can't, because I forget who it was who said it, but it might have been Darby, it might have been someone else on Twitter. But the fact that New York, that Libero is their Reaper, May, Pharah, Doomfist, and Hanzo player, so they can't play. Flower has kind of started to come into his own a bit, and I think that could be their one saving grace. And they do have a really good tank line, but I just don't see New York catching up to. And London did go to like an 8th map against Shanghai, but I just don't think we can, in good conscience, predict a New York victory in this case. It could happen, yeah, but I don't think we can say it should happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we're doing predictions in a situation like this, where we've got a new hero, we've got a pretty much entirely new meta, all predictions should be taken with a healthy grain of salt here. Anything can happen in playoffs. Anything can go down. But we have to look at what we've seen, and New York just hasn't been the same team, this season as they were last year, and even last year they choked in the playoffs. So it's hard to really see this going well for them, but they certainly still have the talent, and I like you bring up Flower. That's an X factor for them. If he can kind of continue getting back to his 2017 form, then they have a shot here. But I'm not confident that that's gonna happen. All right, let's talk final first round matchup here. San Francisco Shock, Atlanta Reign. I like Atlanta, and I do think they are probably I think they have a case to be made that they could be a top 3 or 4 team in the playoffs. But unfortunately for them, I think they're playing the best team. So it's hard. It's tough for them. They kind of got unlucky. In my mind, I think you're better off if you were London and you fell into the play-ins, and now you get to play in YXL.
Yeah, that'll teach you for getting good enough at Atlanta.
You should have just chose to lose to Boston.
And everyone would have won. Boston wouldn't have gone 0-7.
Yeah.
Is it a hot take to think that I actually think this will be pretty close? I have no idea if that's a hot take or not.
I think these are the 2 best teams in the league right now. I think Vancouver's a close third, but I think that whichever team is going to lose this is going to win the losers bracket. I think that it just happened to be a matchup between the 2 strongest teams at the 6th and 3rd seeds. The Shock was like 6th seed in the stage 1 playoffs, and they of course went on to the finals. And
you've got to be kidding me.
we might have just gone down.
Okay, I think we're back.
No.
You can't hear me?
Now I can hear you.
Now we can hear you. Is everything okay?
Yes, I think everything's fine. We'll need to hear from Kate, but I don't know what is going on. My Discord or my audio sources just keep spazzing out.
Discord was like, I'll work for you today, but only at the cost of not working for you when you need it most. I think Atlanta and San Francisco are the 2 best teams. So, and I think they might meet again at grand finals. So I don't think that's a hot take at all. But I think San Francisco is just too good with their roster depth and players like Rascal, like Architect, if they play them. They have so many players they can bench some of the best players in the league and still win. You've got Moth, one of the most consistent supports probably in the entire league. They've just got too many good players.
Yeah, there's not a weak point on this roster where I think you can look at Atlanta and yes, you could see players who can go toe to toe with what San Francisco is bringing to the table, but I don't think you can say that at every single position, which is what you've got with the Shock there. They're just absolutely loaded.
And if they do have a weakness, they just fill it with Rascal.
Just put Rascal in.
Yeah,
Rascal is the Band-Aid.
Pretty much.
Yeah, I still put San Francisco winning. I just think it'll be pretty close.
Yeah,
I think it'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I think this is gonna be an explosive game, and I do like Atlanta moving forward. But speaking of which, let's get into the second round a little bit, and this will get kind of janky because it relies on our previous predictions to work out what these games are going to be. But we'll start with the
different teams.
We'll start with the first lower bracket game, which is going to be the loser of Vancouver Soul, which we have all agreed is the Soul Dynasty, going up against the loser of the Gladiators and the Spark. Who we've got some disagreement on there, and we all have different teams coming out of this lower bracket. So the good part about this is none of us can step on each other's toes when it comes to our points here. Toes.
Stop, please. Enough of the toes.
Okay, and we'll be brief with these because it's hard to talk about, and we're projecting further down the line at this point. We don't have defined matchups, but I think the Soul Dynasty are legit. I am probably gonna get burned on this one because every time I have come to this, Soul and Philadelphia throughout the season, every time I started to believe they made me regret that. But Seoul, I think, has finally kind of put it together here. They have a set lineup. They have players on kind of, I think, their best heroes in a lot of cases, or at least the best heroes they can be for the current meta. And I don't know. I think they have enough here to deal with either Hangzhou or LA. But this game is going to be an absolute dogfight. No matter who actually winds up there, trying to stave off elimination, that's going to bring out the best in teams. So I can't wait for this one.
Yeah, as the singular person to have the Gladiators losing their previous match, I now have the Gladiators winning this match. Basically, oddly enough, for the reason Bradley said, where I think when it comes down to... I honestly think these two teams, Soul and the Gladiators, are pretty evenly matched when it just comes to skill, which I think, as is often the case, it'll just come down to who wants it more. And in that case, I'll be the Gladiators.
I am the one person on TGH who has Hangzhou winning the second game, assuming they lost the first one. And I gotta admit, it's kind of just because I felt so bad of changing Hangzhou to Gladiators in the first game that I'm like, but I still want them to stay in, so I'll pick them in the second one. Because my argument with that is just that they lose the first game, they learn from it, they play the same game, but I'm also not sure if they could learn that quickly, even if they did lose the first game. I really want to assume that Hangzhou is still going to be in this at the end of this weekend. Seoul would probably be a safer pick because we can all basically kind of assume Seoul's gonna be playing in that game, so it'd be more likely that they would win it. But I'm sticking with Hangzhou because I ain't no coward.
I like it. Stick to your guns, Ethan. Okay, things get a little bit easier from here on out because we are all in agreement on the first round games that lead into these. So this one is the second lower bracket game. We've all agreed that this is going to wind up being Atlanta versus NYXL. After that first round, you could either see San Francisco or London in this game as well. But we all agree it was in NYXL in Atlanta. And we've laid out why we all kind of believe in Atlanta and why we don't necessarily believe in New York. I just got to say, it's going to be really funny for me to have Atlanta beat the number 2 seed in the entire league 3 times in the same year.
No. Can you not say that so you don't jinx it, please?
though that is a good point that Atlanta have beat New York Excel several times already, so that's actually a really good argument.
I mean, we already talked about... I don't have anything to say about Atlanta winning this. I didn't say earlier where, top 2 teams in the league, really hard to argue against either of them.
We could talk about how Sam thinks that Atlanta is going to get out this week because he has London beating Atlanta in the losers bracket, which if New York Excel did win, could we even think that Atlanta would beat London in that case, or that London would beat Atlanta? Or
I think it'd be a closer game.
I do think it would be a closer game. I still think it was Atlanta. They beat London in stage 4 when the top 6 spot was kind of on the line at that point. And yeah, I think they'll adapt well to this meta. It's obviously hard to really forecast, but I that one would be really entertaining to me. Okay, match 7, the first, I guess quarterfinal. I don't know what you want to call it when it's a double elimination bracket. The upper bracket second round. Vancouver Titans, we all agree coming out of there, and gonna be taking on the winner of LA and Hangzhou. And I don't see a world in which either of these teams can really hold up a candle to Vancouver, to be totally honest. I am much more confident in if Vancouver wins against Seoul that they will also win this game.
It's the Seoul curse. It's like you just need to get over Seoul as the hardest obstacle. Hangzhou did not. But I think that I completely agree that Seoul is probably almost a little more worrisome than either of these two teams could be. Hangzhou has never beaten Vancouver, and Vancouver has constantly beaten Hangzhou. And Gladiators, I just don't see as enough of a standout team.
Pretty much. Hangzhou came really, really close to at least map 5ing Vancouver, but that was a long time ago and that was a different meta. So
Yeah.
we've already talked about Hangzhou kind of being a little bit slow on the uptake when it comes to change. I think at this point, if they're gonna be at Vancouver, the meta would have needed to change a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
For some reason, I have a lot less faith now than I did when I still believe they'll beat Gladiators, but I just don't see them finally being the moment where they take down the Titans.
I think if you're Hangzhou, you're really just like coming into this week and you're like, we need to get, obviously you're trying to avoid losing both your games, but you're like, we need to get one win so that we survive to week 2, and we have a little bit more time to like sink our teeth into this meta and get used to it. I think if that happens, they will be kind of legitimately dangerous moving forward. But I think there's a big risk of them just going out and kind of flaming out of the bracket right off the bat. But we've talked about that enough. We'll wrap up now with the last game of the week, and that's gonna be the San Francisco Shock taking on the winner of New York versus London. So we all agreed this was London.
It's the Shock. That's the argument.
Yeah, it's the Shock. I mean, until we see anything different from them, how are you gonna pick against them? Like I until we see them lose, I am not picking them to lose. It's that simple.
Mm-hmm.
They've had points where they've choked in the past, but a lot of them were inconsequential games.
Mm-hmm.
The Shock is like, when push comes to shove, the Shock goes into like some of the best Overwatch we've ever seen. They've gotten to all 3 of the stage finals, the only team to be able to do that. They barely lost the first one and they barely lost the third one. So Shock is like the opposite of New York. They are, or maybe more akin to London, but they are just the playoff team that can just go ham in playoffs every single time.
Yeah, I mean, when this team locks in, they hit a level that's higher than any other team in the league, I think. I say this as a fan of the other team who is trying to lay claim to the title of best team in the league, but I think San Francisco has just been a bit better across the board. They've been more adaptable, and I don't think that's going to stop here.
Pretty much.
Okay. Well, would you look at that? It is 5:31 exactly, which means it is time for Watch Point. And that means it's the end of our show. We'll be back again next week to talk about all the games that went down this week, what to expect from the last weekend before the grand finals. It's kind of crazy how close we are to the end of the season here. But I cannot wait for this weekend. It's gonna be insane how much high stakes Overwatch we have. 8 best of 7 series. I don't think people are quite ready for like the marathon that this is gonna be.
It's a lot.
I'm so excited. It's gonna be phenomenal. But that'll do it for us here today at WatchHaus. Thank you all for joining us. We really appreciate you taking the time to listen to us spout sometimes terrible opinions about Overwatch, sometimes great ones.
What do you mean?
Toes.
All my opinions are good.
Just like Toes. Okay.
Never had a bad opinion in my life.
Can I just leave before you guys do? Leave the stream first, so I don't have to deal with Toes.
All right. From our house to yours, thank you all for watching.